Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. Today's topic is assessment centres, and I think regardless of what area of policing you work in, I think you will find this one very interesting, because at some point we're all going to go through a recruitment process or be a recruiter. So we've got two guests lined up for us today from Kent and Essex Police, who are going to talk about their assessment centre and what they are adapting to use M365 technology and how they're doing things a little bit differently during lockdown. Before I introduce them to us, let me just remind you that this session is recorded. So if you'd like to watch it back or you'd like to share it with any of your colleagues, you can find it on our website later on today. Now, there is a Q&A running throughout the next 30 minutes. If you want to pop your questions into that, we'll come to them at the end. But let me move swiftly on to introduce our two guests to you. So firstly, we have Kirsty Ferrand. So if we just put Kirsty on camera, and Kirsty can give us all a wave.
Hi everyone.
Hi there, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Kirsty is a performance design and evaluation manager, and she is joined today by her colleague James Allison, who is likewise working in performance design and evaluation and is a supervisor. So James, we're going to come to you in a few moments because you're going to talk us through a little demonstration that you have. But let's begin with Kirsty. And Kirsty, maybe you'd sort of set the scene for us and tell us a little bit about your assessment centre, who it is that you're assessing, what you used to do, what you changed, why you've made these changes and what's working well for you. So over to you, Kirsty.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you everybody for inviting us here this afternoon. As we've all found, COVID presented us with some huge challenges early last year. And one of them was how we could overcome the social distancing and travel restrictions that the government imposed in March. What we decided to do was try to put something online utilising the Microsoft 365 products, as well as our learning management system, Develop Me. Jim will go into that in a little bit more detail, but it will also demonstrate how, if you don't have a learning management system, you could utilise 365 products to enable you to do this as well. So our recruitment assessment centres would usually be run in both of our colleges. It would entail applicants coming into the colleges physically. They would sit down, listen to some audio. They would have big piles of paper, and it would sort of be run like a formal assessment centre. So we needed to be able to try and do that online. And we managed to set something up in our learning management system with teams running alongside it to be able to brief candidates. The first one was run, I think it was late March, early April. And whilst it did pose a few technical difficulties, we got some really good feedback from it, and we were able to use the same question sets, the same pro forma that we were using in face-to-face assessment centres, and most importantly, we got roughly about the same pass mark, so we knew we were onto something that was manageable. We were also able to overcome any learning barriers such as dyslexia, etc., and we were able to build in some additional time for those candidates. So far, we've run about 15 assessment centres, incorporating detention officers, force control room, volunteers, specials, and most recently, week before last, we ran a sergeant case file promotion assessment centre as well. We've seen about 1,500 people now through these processes, sitting both within the two counties but also external to the two counties. We did find that not everybody would have access to a laptop or desktop at home, so we were able to overcome those restrictions by inviting somebody into the college. They were given an office that was obviously fully wiped down. We abided by all the social distancing requirements, so we were able to offer that to anybody that didn't have access to the IT equipment needed. There are obviously the technical difficulties that we needed to overcome, so that we provided students with sort of how-to guides and a test ahead, so they could brief themselves and make contact with any issues they found. But equally, the teams chat running alongside would assist them with that. There are obviously additional resource costs to building this and to maintaining it, but two of our teams were able to assist initially, but we handed this process over to recruitment eventually, and they are able to administer the assessment centres by themselves. We don't need to help them with that anymore, which was great for us. We have seen an increase in the licensing costs, and please, I'm trying to give you the pros first of all, and then I can sell. Sorry, the benefits afterwards. The cons is the bit that I'm talking about now, obviously. But there was an increase in our licensing costs because every time somebody accesses our LMS, we do lock off a license for 12 months. However, we've managed to balance that against the savings that we've made. So we were able to invite people in who are having to shield at home. We were also able to utilise staff that were having to shield at home because they could run these assessment centres remotely. We have seen a reduction in travel time and costs. We've obviously seen as a result of that an improvement in our green footprint. We have received some really excellent feedback off the back of it, and a reduction in having to actually staff these events, whereby we would normally have probably about 5 members of staff physically seeing people into the college, all the security issues around that, having to invite them in, give them passes, etc. That's all been removed. And it's been such a success that I don't think we'll ever go back to having the in-house assessment centres again. Certainly not for these areas anyway. So yeah, a really good news story, I think, both for Office 365, but also for our staff and for the two counties that we were able to continue recruiting. So if I hand over to Jim now, and he'll be able to give you a demonstration of how we actually physically did it. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and get this up and running shortly. Okay, so I'm going to split this presentation into two really. One, some of the considerations that we took before we actually started design and build of the platform. So what we wanted to do, and we've been very lucky in learning development that we've had access to Microsoft 365 products from day one as a use case, and I'm also very fortunate to have an LMS, but I'll talk to you a little bit about what that does and how that can be replicated with an add-on. So our aim really was to create assessment centres that were 100% replicas of what you would do if you was to attend our college. What we didn't want to do is create a completely separate product, and the reason why is because when it comes to having accessibility and fairness, if someone did not have the IT at home and we wasn't able to provide it, which we are in a fortunate position that we can, that if they did a paper copy, they would be sitting the same type of questions, the same timings, and it would be a replica. So we also looked at the accessibility, which was key for us. How do we make sure this is accessible to people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, who have other neurodiversities that we need to look at? And that was done by, I suppose, looking at our communication methods, looking at what devices people may access this on, whether that be a Windows device, an Apple device, a mobile, a tablet, and I suppose giving people advice and guidance on how to make these or how to have these assessments as accessible as possible. So we've split that up into two. So the first part is how we use Microsoft Teams to communicate, and the second part is how we integrate our LMS into Microsoft Teams so people can access it. And that really is a simple URL bringing it into Microsoft Teams. So I've thrown this into a training channel. Hopefully you can see my screen at the moment. There is a lot of assessments happening today, so I have put it into a training channel because there's a lot of live data currently on there. So if an assessment centre set up, we set that up by first obviously having this would be called PCSO assessment centre, for example. In there, before the assessment starts, we put simple guides, simple downloadable guides to any of the candidates, whether we send that on email or we can send that via SharePoint, just so they have an understanding about how the assessment day runs. And that might look something really, really simple like a PDF. So this one, we're going to look at the PCSO one very quickly. So this is the assessment guide, which just gives an introduction, a little bit about, obviously, congratulations for getting past the first stage, what they need to know in regards to their internet browser, what they need to have equipment available to them, what the supported browsers are, and then a few tips and tricks about how to get the best connection, including obviously disconnecting any other unnecessary Wi-Fi devices. We then obviously got the stage of logging in to Develop Me, and what you'll see shortly is how we give people a practice assessment before they actually turn up on the assessment day, so they are really familiar with the systems that they're using. We then have, this will be more for the assessment team. This will be just really using the simple wiki function within Teams as a bit of a spill before the assessment day starts. So what would normally happen is that some of this material will be made available before, but on the day of the assessment centre, a member of recruitment would be online, like we are with you guys now, and they would have the cameras on, and they would do an introduction to how the day is going to be run. And this team event really lasts throughout the whole assessment centre. I don't know if any of you have recently been on external exams for companies like PeopleCert or something like that, but there is a requirement that obviously we can see that person and we know what they're doing. For us, Teams is great. We can run Teams along with our LMS. Because of its low bandwidth requirement, even if you have not the fastest internet speed, you will still get a really good connection and be able to complete the assessment online. We then have a very short series of training videos, and again, this is to familiarise any of the candidates along with how to use Microsoft Teams. We might not put all these videos on here. These are the ones I've pulled through for today, but there will be things like video call basics, some of the chat functions, an introduction to Microsoft Teams, and the standards that we expect. So what we don't want is candidates coming dressed inappropriately in their dressing gown, for example. And then we have our LMS, which we've pulled into Microsoft Teams. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the assessment centres that we've got open at the moment. So if I go to our candidate dashboard, these are currently the assessment centres that we're running. And part of our accessibility requirements really was to look at how we can make each of these accessible. So they are timed. There is always a time adjusted version available to candidates. And then when we go into the assessment centre itself, there are also some accessibility options on the side, including changing the background colour and adding the bar where you can have text to speech. So you can highlight an area, highlight that, and obviously it would speak it to you. Where it's more in depth, we also recorded, done a voiceover for the introduction as well, so people can access the kind of the sample or the MP3 file. I'm just going to, here we go, as an example, it wasn't working there. So we can change these colours, and also we can make the text bigger or smaller, which is really helpful for the exam. So I'm just going to put that back into its original state. So with every assessment centre that we kind of run, and again, bring in our LMS into Microsoft Teams, so we're really managing this through one channel or one conversation or appointment in your diary. There will be an introduction. We then pull through our recruitment video that relates to that particular assessment centre. And then there are obviously disclaimers before you start, making sure that people are set up. So for this assessment centre here, and we've done this for everyone, we have a practice. Now, this practice isn't anything related to the questions that you'll get in the PCSO assessment centre. It really is more an example of how to navigate around our LMS. Where you see an I, it's very much about information. Where you see a number, it's very much about a question. So this particular one here is talking you through how to navigate around the page, how you would play a audio sample or a video sample. And this one here is testing the audio equipment to make sure you wouldn't have heard that, but you're to make sure that your microphone and your speakers are working. And then we navigate through and we can have, for example, a practice answer. So it says here, put the word example into the box here, just so we ensure that people are, I suppose, ready to take their assessment and actually the IT doesn't get in the way. This is normally made available to them 14 days before. There is no real time scale. Recruitment like to give about 7 days notice for assessment centres, but as we all know, that if you're from other police forces, that's not always possible and it can be a little last minute. But we can get people on the system and create a profile within about 5 or 10 minutes. We then, as we move forward, gives you different components. So this one is where you click kind of a multiple choice or a matching component. And then as we go through, again, providing you more examples. This is very much an open text field where you can type into here. And we work our way through to give every single kind of example of type of question that you might received. Again, multiple choice question here. And then you kind of go into the assessment. So I'm going to go back home and I'm going to go to a slightly different assessment to start the process. Now I'm going to go into our sergeant promotion process. So this is our newest assessment centre, and this is for sergeants going through the board. We now have a case file exercise, and the case file exercise is really important as it's an area of obviously a new demoted sergeant really needs to understand. So we have a case file exercise assessment, and with that you get a number of handouts. So what you do get before the exam is you get the National Case File Standards, you get an MG5, and you get a kind of good example. If I press enter now, here we go. So this will give some examples of National Case File Standards. Now what we can do is we can also copy and paste them into the files so they become more accessible on more devices. But if I was to click on this, for example, then it opens it up, and then you have an example here. We'll just log back into that. So we go, here's an MG4, and so this is some pre-reads and some material that they can refer to. Now the way it's been designed and the way obviously Microsoft products work is that they open up in separate tabs, so you haven't got to go back, you're not getting lost in the process. So that's really important that actually any PDFs or anything we have open are available not only here, but in the files, so actually they're accessible to everyone. On the left hand side, obviously you've got the timing function sitting within here, so they know how long they've got left. And then at the end of the assessment, we get the data. So this is automatically marking, and it saves recruitment a hell of a lot of time in regards to manually marking, printing off the documents, scanning them in. The only thing we can't mark is open text because we don't have the AI or the answer in the background, but every other multiple choice or simple written answers can be easily manually marked. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking on the chat that, okay, that's great, you've got an NMS, but we haven't. This is all written with something called, in your IT department will know this if you don't, something called scorm data. And scorm data is basically whatever program's ability to read exam questions, multiple choice questions, and some visual components. We do have our own NMS, but you wouldn't need a full NMS to run this. You would need a scorm data add-on, which there are many out there now over the last 12 to 24 months during COVID, add-ons that you can have on Microsoft Teams through your IT department. Some at zero cost, some there are licensing costs, but this is all certainly simple through the Office 365 products. You do have also the ability to use things like polling, which you can bring that in through Microsoft Forms in a kind of simpler form of doing things. You want to bring in that via this element here. There are many ways you can use, even if you can speak to IT, I would certainly go down this route for forces that don't have an NMS, looking at a Power App, looking at Power Automate to kind of bring multiple choice questions and exams directly into Microsoft 365 to run your assessment centres. So that's a real kind of whistle-stop tour of how we've kind of managed our assessment centres, how we've built them, and I will just have a look at any questions coming because I can't see them on my screen currently.
James, thanks very much for what I'll read the questions out to you. So I'll just invite everybody who's listening to pop the questions into the Q&A there. But could I start off with a question and just ask, how long has this taken you to develop? So from the point at which you decided that this was the route to go to actually holding your first assessment centre in this way, how long did that take?
So we got the request in March last year, and it took 4 weeks to have our first one up and running, which was our Investigate First programme. So these are student officers that come in but actually have a desire to be detectives and go on a fast track. What I would say, and this is one thing I'm really pushing this year throughout the whole organisation as a learning development professional really, is that we've got our NMS and it does require someone that knows what they're doing to build. If you are using Microsoft 365 products, for example, a SharePoint site for your online to host your online assessments, you can do that in days. And we've actually, Kirsty will say, we've had a request a few weeks ago on a Thursday evening saying the sergeant's promotion process, and we've got 90 candidates. Can you build us something by the Tuesday? And we could do it. And it's because of how easy it is to program this to do exactly what you want it to do. So yeah, not long at all.
But that one looked relatively sophisticated, so that one took 4 weeks to...
yeah, but then you have a template, and I think that's really important. So, for example, our communication centre, DDOs, specials and volunteers all do the assessment centres, including a spelling test, attribute test, verbal reasoning tests. Actually, they're all used for those processes. So apart from maybe branding, you can use some of those elements. So the initial setup is complicated, but actually after that, it's a real simple thing to do.
Okay, so it's coming on to that second step then. I think, Kirsty, you mentioned that you handed this over then to HR and recruitment. So you guys developed it, but then what kind of training did you have to provide to the staff to implement it?
So it was fairly basic training on how to administer, because if you think back to last March where we all were, we were only just getting access to Teams. Everyone was a little bit unsure, and I think it was mostly confidence building. They needed to understand how they could answer students, etc. But apart from the build of the product will always remain with us, but the administration, uploading of different papers, etc., that can all be done now by the administration teams within recruitment. So yeah, we can, once that build's done, step away really, unless there are any technical difficulties, and let them run it. So it's been great. It was a lot of work for us initially. You know, that is. Other work did have to be put to one side, and we're fairly used to the last minute calls now, but there is certainly an appetite for it with our chief officers to remain as is.
Okay, lovely. Let's come to a couple of the viewers' questions then. So the first one here is there a difference in outcomes compared to real world events? I guess that question means, you know, have you seen any changes to the results that you're getting?
Jim, you can answer that. I know you have the answer.
So well, actually, that was a real important thing. I really should have mentioned that what we did during the testing phase is actually we got quite a few staff within our own L&D department to basically do the assessment centre and establish whether there is a difference. And what we've found is, and it does take careful design with regards to timings, that they are comparable. So for example, PHSOs, we normally get about 65-68% pass rate. I think we're getting 68-69 on the online assessment. If it's not, we will review that after the debrief and see if we can adjust it to make sure that it is I suppose not a difficult test, but actually it's not a walk in the park, that they are comparable. But yes, the scores have been very similar.
Lovely. And another one here. Have you said that you sought user feedback, but was there any kind of negatives that you had to address?
I think some of the IT, I think a lot of people want to access this via mobile devices and tablets. And for us, that's probably not the best way to do it. So there are some negative feedbacks when people use a device without a keyboard. Because those open text input, you can't do this on a phone. So we have changed some of our guidance and actually said you need a desktop or laptop computer. It does work on a mobile device, but our feedback was too negative on that front.
Lovely. And then someone's asking, how many people have you recruited to date via this approach? So how many people have you had on the assessment centres? And I'd be interested to know how many, what's the largest number of people that you've had in one assessment centre?
What, Jim, I don't know if that was the last week with the sergeants, where we had over 90 for that, but 1,500 have been through since last March so far.
And how many could you potentially have on one session?
There's no limit to our LMS, but teams 300.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I think we'd be limited by teams.
And I think what we wouldn't want to do is actually almost be greedy and try and rush people through. We want to give everybody a really good, fair chance at this. We know people are going to be nervous. Not everybody is used to using remote access or discussion points. So yeah, I think it's really important that it's manageable and we can give everybody the attention they need at the time.
And have you considered using it for op uplift for officer recruitment?
I think there is an element of that, but being a national search centre and obviously directed by COP, I don't think we can at the moment. The only thing we have used Microsoft for is some of the senior interviews we do, and so about the assessment centre, and that varies. We use Microsoft for the simple 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 interviews all the way to assessment, but yeah, but not at the moment. Not at the moment.
Never say never.
Yeah.
And something slightly more technical, is this within the NEP MOU and therefore available to all forces? So I'm guessing the Teams element of it is, but then you talked about different licenses that you needed for additional pieces of software. Yeah,
so our LMS, which is run by a company called Learning Pool, is obviously not part of the NEP build on Microsoft 365, and does require our specialist e-learning developers to create for. However, a lot of people within the forces not going to have access to things like Power Apps, Power Automate and stuff like that. I think if you was to contact your IT company, this is very easy. You could build these exams with Power Apps very easily. So it's not all of it, but you could certainly replicate it with other Microsoft 365 products.
Excellent. Could you just say a little bit more about accessibility? I know that you mentioned that earlier, but what adaptations have you had to make? So how easy was it to do it?
Absolutely. So we have obviously we send out during the recruitment a questionnaire regarding what neurodiversities people might have. They can send us our dyslexia assessments and we will tailor the assessment centre to them. So that might be 25% extra time. That might be text needs to be on a certain background and colour. And within Microsoft 365 accessibility options and our LMS accessibility options, we can turn those on. Where it's not turned on, we will say have a video, we'll then have a transcript, and we might have a podcast as well. So actually there's 3 ways to access that information. And so I know recruitment also have screen coverings they can send out for those that need their screen to have yellow tints. So we use Microsoft's accessibility options along with our LMS to tailor it for those that need it. For example, our last sergeant's process, there were several people that had neurodiversity issues that we needed to cater for. And again, Microsoft products gave us that ability to do so quite easily.
Smashing. Thanks very much. Well, we're just coming to the end of our session now. That's gone really, really quickly. We did have one person who was asking if you could share your presentation. It wasn't exactly a presentation, was it? Because you were showing us a live screen, but maybe if there's a couple of screen grabs that you could provide to us, and then we can forward them on if you want to contact us here at the NEP. So Kirsty and James, that was really, really interesting. And as I say, I'm sure, regardless of what area of policing you work in, you will hopefully have taken something away from that. So thank you very much for joining us. We much appreciate your time. That's it. We're at the end of our session. We'll be back next week at exactly the same time, 12 noon, when we have a session on managing SharePoint. And if you have a quick look in your Q&A now, you'll find the link to it so that you can join us next Wednesday at 12 noon, and we'll see you all then. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.